The light they can't kill. What corrupt politicians fear most, the most captivating and bestseller, woe. Part 1, The Anatomy of Fear. What truly terrifies the corrupt? It's not what you think. Chapter 1, The Throne Tremble. At 3:41 a.m., the president sat barefoot in a room he trusted more than his war council. The lights were off, the window sealed, a thick curtain pinned shut with a rusted knife. He didn't want the guards to see the glow of his screen. On his lap, a steel briefcase, on the desk, a burner phone with no contacts, no SIM, no excuses. A single tone chirped through the encrypted app. He stared. No message, just a file name. The list 7 final MP4. He knew the name. He had buried it years ago, deep beneath favors and silence and blood. And yet here it was, blinking like a curse. His pulse quickened. Not from guilt, but fear. The kind of fear that power was never supposed to know. The throne had trembled. History likes to frame corrupt politicians as villains with certainty. Confident, swaggering men in tailored suits. Photoshopped smiles. Insulated by motorcades and marble. But the truth is darker and far less cinematic. Corrupt leaders don't fear consequences. They fear loss of control. Not prison, not poverty, but power slipping through a crack they didn't see. They fear the leak that gets out before the statement is drafted. The rogue insider who doesn't take the money. The moment the public stops laughing at their lies. They fear unpredictability, because unpredictability is the only thing power cannot dominate. Psychologists call it cognitive load decay, the weight of managing a lie. But in the upper echelons of state corruption, it's more like a spiritual decay, an erosion of sleep, trust, and time. Power corrupts, yes, but corruption also corrodes. And nowhere is that corrosion clearer than in the routines of the powerful. Dictators have their chefs taste their food. Autocrats surround themselves with mirrors, but cover them when they sleep. Ministers refuse to fly commercial, not for status, but for fear of recognition. In one Eastern European capital, a former Minister of Defense installed soundproof insulation in his bathroom after a junior staffer was caught transcribing toilet conversations. In a South American regime, the leader spent $14 million on a mobile disinformation unit and $18 million on personal surveillance of his own cabinet. They weren't just afraid of coups, they were afraid of questions. What does a corrupt politician truly fear? Not the law. Laws can be rewritten, not journalists. They can be bought, sued, or buried. Not even protests. Tear gas is cheap. What they fear, truly fear, is the uncontrolled witness. The one who won't stop talking. The voice that doesn't need a microphone to echo. The janitor who saw something. The accountant with the USB drive. The mother who lost her son and still remembers the badge number. They fear memory. They fear virality. They fear the unpredictable convergence of one truth with one platform in one moment they can't control. And once it happens, no spin is fast enough. In 2012, a West African energy minister staged a press conference to announce a new anti-corruption initiative. On camera, he pledged transparency and reform. What he didn't know was that 14 minutes before he stepped onto the podium, a whistleblower had uploaded a video of him receiving a suitcase filled with cash from an oil contractor. The video, timestamped the day before, was tagged, "Your Hero." By the time the minister was halfway through his speech, the video had 4 million views. By the next morning, he was in exile. By the end of the week, so were half his allies. He hadn't been taken down by a coup. He had been taken down by a contradiction. The fear is biological. Adrenaline disrupts the decision-making centers. Cortisol levels rise and stay elevated. This is why corrupt leaders become erratic, paranoid, obsessive. Power doesn't make them confident. It makes them desperate to maintain illusion. One South Asian dictator reportedly had 3 copies of every newspaper printed each morning. Each version edited for a different audience. He read the public version last, while muttering to himself, "Let's see what I'm lying about today." But the greatest fear, the one that haunts every palace and parliament stained by secrecy, it's not exposure, it's irrelevance, the slow death of their myth. The moment the people stop caring, not because they're afraid, but because they've moved on, because someone else spoke louder, because someone else remembered, because the truth outlasted them. At 3:41 a.m., the president didn't open the file. He powered down the phone, crushed it under his heel, and dropped the pieces into a vase of chlorinated water. But he knew, somewhere, someone still had a copy. Maybe 10, maybe 1,000. It didn't matter. The light was out now, and his own silence was the only confession he had left. He walked back to the throne room, not to sleep. He couldn't. Not anymore. Power had made him untouchable, but it had never made him unknowable. And somewhere out there, someone knew. You can bury a man, but you cannot bury what he saw. Not forever. Not if the light still lives in the ones he told. Chapter 2. The Mirror. They avoid. He brushed his hair 3 times to the left, once to the right, just as the stylist had shown him. The custom-tailored suit clung to his shoulders like armor. He adjusted the lapel pin of the national flag, looked at the cameras outside the press chamber, and said to his aide, "Are they ready for greatness?" He smiled, but not at the world, at the mirror. And the mirror, polished, gold-framed, imported from Milan, smiled back. But it wasn't admiration that stared at him. It was fear. The obsession with image isn't just a vanity issue for the corrupt. It is their defense mechanism, their mask. Their drug. Once a leader slips into deception, power doesn't merely become a goal, it becomes a performance. Every press conference, every photograph, every televised walk to a podium becomes an act in a play where truth is the one character that must never appear on stage. And the audience, the public, the press, the global eye, they must never see the sweat behind the smile. In the Philippines, a governor once reportedly hired an entire digital firm to delete unflattering photos from the internet. He spent more public money on algorithmic beauty filters than on rural healthcare. In his inner circle, it was said that no one dared mention his hair dye budget, unless they wanted to be transferred to a border province. In Latin America, a notorious dictator ordered a 16-foot bronze statue of himself for the Capitol Square. He rejected the first version. Too realistic, he said. He demanded the jaw be made stronger, the arms longer, the shoulders squared, like a god. He didn't want to be remembered. He wanted to be imagined. Psychologists have a name for this: self-concept dissonance. It's the growing gap between who a person believes they are and what reality reflects back. In corrupt leadership, this dissonance becomes a silent scream. The leader projects invincibility but feels hollow. He claims divinity but drowns in insecurity. And so he builds palaces of flattery and pays court jesters to whisper worship in every hallway, because the truth, if ever spoken, might crack the mirror. In one Eastern European country, a populist president fired an entire newsroom after a leaked broadcast accidentally captured him snapping at a child. In his memoirs, he would later write, "I didn't lose my temper, I lost the script." The script was his mirror. What corrupt politicians fear most is not the accusation. It is the reflection. Not what the public says, but what they might see when the lights go out and the applause fades, and the last loyalist has left the room. They fear the man in the mirror will no longer bow. Some try to control the mirror. One Gulf state monarch reportedly had his portrait painted every 6 months, not for the press, but for himself. As he aged, the portraits did not. They were altered subtly, year by year. Fewer wrinkles, straighter posture, brighter eyes. He once told a guest, "This is the version of me history will remember." He didn't say it with pride. He said it with pleading. Others go further. In a West African nation, a leader banned newspapers from printing any photo of him looking tired, hunched, or contemplative. All presidential images were required to show him walking, waving, or laughing. Within 3 years, the people began to whisper that he had gone mad. Not because of a scandal, but because no one had seen him still. Even dictators need to look in the mirror. But mirrors don't lie, and so they become haunted objects, shine daily, but never truly gazed into. In psychological terms, the mirror becomes the site of internal collapse. Once a leader's self-image is tied to public power, any loss, approval ratings, online ridicule, leaked footage, feels like annihilation. It is not just embarrassment, it is ego death. And ego death to the corrupt is worse than prison, because it means the myth is dying. And without the myth, what remains? A man, a coward, A fraud, a soul that traded its reflection for applause. When a military strongman in Central Africa fell from power in a coup, he was found hiding in a secret room beneath the presidential residence. On the wall was a single cracked mirror. Etched into its surface, written in permanent ink, were the words, "I still am, I still am, I still am." He had tried to inscribe his existence into the mirror itself, but the glass was already broken. The deeper the corruption, the more curated the image. Behind every golden frame is a terrified man asking, "Do they still believe me?" And beneath that question, a darker one, "Do I still believe me?" Most can't answer. That's why the mirror becomes the enemy. It reflects not just flaws, but fractures. Not just lies, but the weight of pretending. The aide knocks. It's time for the press conference. The cameras are ready. The podium glows. Outside, the people chant, not with loyalty, but with hunger, rage, and memory. The leader puts on his watch, straightens the flag pin, clears his throat. Then he walks past the mirror without looking. He knows better now. The mirror doesn't lie. And he doesn't want to see himself becoming the thing he used to fear. You can rewrite the headlines, you can silence the critic, but one day you will face the only mirror that matters, and it will remember everything you tried to forget. Chapter 3, Legacy in the Ashtray. The last thing he did before boarding the jet was light a cigar. It was custom-rolled, imported from Havana, kept in a climate-controlled humidor. He lit it slowly, deliberately, staring out across the empty tarmac. Behind him, the Capitol burned, its parliament stormed, portraits torn down, statues graffitied. But the cigar burned steadily in his hand, a final symbol of the lie he had told himself for decades, that he would be remembered. He took 2 puffs, then flicked it into the ashtray bolted to the limousine door. A decade of rule gone in smoke. Not even the driver looked back. Power gives a man the illusion of permanence. But history is not a palace, it is a furnace. Corrupt politicians don't just fear prison or exposure, they fear insignificance. They fear that after all the manipulation, all the slogans, all the portraits hung in government halls, the only place they'll live on is in someone else's footnote. And worse, in the jokes told about them by the generation they failed to fool. In one Southeast Asian nation, a former dictator once commissioned a mausoleum the size of a university campus. Inside, bronze murals depicted him shaking hands with world leaders, blessing children, smiling beside wheat fields he never visited. But outside, teenagers spray-painted over the entrance. "You stole our future. We took your name." By the time he died, his face was forbidden from the new currency, his statue removed. His name, once synonymous with strength, was now spoken only in court documents and satire shows. Legacy wasn't his reward, it became his rebuke. What do they really leave behind? The answer, often, is paper and pain. Papers detailing shell corporations in Malta, Panama, Seychelles. Papers authorizing torture under the guise of national security. Papers that denied funding for hospitals and funneled it to beachfront property portfolios. Papers signed in gold ink that condemned entire communities to silence. But these documents never make the museum walls. They survive in archives, in files hidden by journalists, in the trembling hands of survivors. They aren't trophies. They're evidence. Legacy for the corrupt is not what they build. It's what they try to bury, and it terrifies them. Some try to script their legacy while still in office. They publish autobiographies, ghost-written by loyalists, padded with revisionist memories and blurred timelines. One European strongman printed 100,000 copies of his memoir, then forced schools to add it to reading lists. 5 years later, it was pulped en masse. A few survived in black market stalls, sold beside counterfeit watches and used shoes. Each copy a quiet gravestone of delusion. Others attempt to engineer reverence through public works, bridges, airports, universities named after themselves. But concrete cannot erase blood. One airport in West Africa was renamed 3 times after the leader who built it was exposed for trafficking weapons through the same airstrip. His name became an inconvenience, then an embarrassment, then a forgotten login on a corrupted server. He had wanted to leave his mark. He did, just not the one he imagined. The fear of legacy failure leads to strange rituals. In South America, a ruling president secretly recorded hundreds of personal audio tapes explaining his decisions, his beliefs, and, most tellingly, his regrets. They were discovered after his death, buried beneath a flag in a private vault. In one tape, he whispers, "They will never know what I did for them, only what they think I did to them." It was not a defense. It was a prayer. Why does legacy haunt the corrupt? Because deep down, they know the truth. That history, if left unmanipulated, will not protect them. That monuments can be melted. That schools will one day teach the real version. That children will ask, why did no one stop him? And someone will answer, some tried, he silenced them. Until one day, he couldn't. What the corrupt rarely understand is this: legacy is not built in marble or media. It is built in memory, not in what the state broadcasts, but in what the people whisper when the cameras are gone, in the survivor's trembling testimony, in the journalist's archived email, in the janitor who tells his grandson, "I saw him once, and I knew he was afraid." In the end, their names are not feared. They are pitied, worse, ignored. History does not hate the corrupt. It simply outlives them. He left the cigar smoldering in the ashtray, a driverless car, a nameless departure. He thought he was escaping, but he had already entered the only courtroom that cannot be bribed, the one in people's memory. And there, the sentence is always the same. You ruled, you lied, and all that's left is ash. They built statues. But the people built stories, and stories live longer than stone.